All right. Well, welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. We've got a great group of folks here. My name is Michelle Ibarraga, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Park County Environmental Council. We're thrilled to be hosting another community conversation today about planning, and this conversation is a part of our ongoing series about planning tools that we use to address growth in our community. And today we're talking about housing, and we're joined by some really great community partners from the Human Resource Development Council and members of the Housing Working Group. So I'm going to do a very quick introduction into PCEC, and then I'll introduce and welcome our guests today. But first, a little Zoom reminder, please mute your computer and be respectful of all of our speakers. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat as they arise. We'll have plenty of time to go through those at the end of our presentation. And as always, today's presentation is recorded and we'll be sharing it on our website. So you can find this recording, you can share it with friends, and past recordings at www.pcecmt.org/community conversations. And maybe somebody, Jonathan or Jen, can drop that in the chat. And also, since we do have, I think, some new folks in the room today, if you don't mind dropping in the chat, where you're calling, if you're zooming in from what part of the county and any specific interests you have, just so we can get to know each other, that'd be super helpful. So a quick introduction about PCEC. We are your community conservation group here in Park County. We have a little over 650 contributing members and 2,500 supporters here in Park County. And our mission is to work with the people of our community to safeguard the land, water, wildlife, and communities in Yellowstone's Northern Gateway. We do that through grassroots organizing and advocacy. Park County is a traditional homeland and current home to many indigenous people, including the Apsiloka or Crow tribe. And Park County today has a long tradition of human habitation, of people who have loved, cherished, and stewarded this place. We're committed to working together to honor this legacy for future generations. We've been hosting these Zoom conversations about growth and planning for the past several years. Our goal is to help create a shared understanding of some of the most pressing issues we face as a community so that we can be more knowledgeable and prepared to advocate for this place. There's also a lot happening in our community right now. We've been seeing more and more people retreating to gateway communities like ours to live near natural amenities, public lands, the Yellowstone River, and Yellowstone National Park. So we're seeing a boom in both recreation and residential development. And that trend has been happening for years, but with the pandemic, the increase in new residents in Southwest Montana has been quite remarkable. And of course, housing has been a very important issue as a result. So we believe that by working together, we can build the vision that we want for our community and the community we want to become, rather than letting growth happen to us. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone to our friends at HRDC, the Human Resource Development Council. They have local offices that serve Gallatin, Park, and Marr counties. And over the past couple of years, HRDC staff have provided Livingston and Park County with assistance specifically addressing the complex issues of housing affordability. So we're joined today by Lila Fleishman and Tracy Menuez. Lila is the Community Development Project Manager with HRDC. She's been in that role since 2018. Her focus is on program development and housing policy, including leading the work of the Park County Housing Coalition since the start of the year. And Tracy is the Associate Director for HRDC, and she's been with HRDC for almost 20 years. And she is a tremendous resource. She's joining us today to help answer any questions about HRDC's work. So thank you, Lila and Tracy, for all you do. I'm gonna pass it to you, Lila.
Great, thanks, Michelle, and thanks everyone for joining and seeing what we have to say about this housing action plan. I have a brief agenda. Let's see if I can go forward. Thanks for everyone that's taken the time to introduce themselves. It's really helpful for us to see who we have on the call and how those questions might shape up. So today we have just a little over 15 minutes, and I definitely want to save a lot of time for questions. I also would like for people that participated in the housing working group to be able to share some of their insight in that process. So did the welcome, a little bit of background about the project, and then an overview of some of the content of the housing action plan. The draft housing action plan is available on our website, so we won't be fully covering every piece of the plan today. But I encourage you to go to our website, look at that draft, and provide some feedback on our page. There's a link at the very end. So how did we get here? There was a Park County Housing Coalition in 2018 that kind of started some of the conversations, and then didn't really maintain consistent momentum until reconvening in 2020. The Park County Community Foundation and HRDC relaunched the Park County Housing Coalition. In 2020, there was about 6 community conversations where guest speakers from peer communities and experts on different topics all got together to have conversations with Park County residents. It was virtual. I think everyone remembers what 2020 looked like. So those were all virtual, and then rolled that into a smaller housing working group that met for 4 sessions at the beginning of this year from February to May, where that 13-person housing working group was an application process where volunteers were selected to represent a diversity of the housing need in Park County. So different perspectives on lived experience, different parts of the county, different sectors of employment, that kind of thing to inform that process. And then this work that we'll be talking about today is the draft outcome of that process. So it reflects the consensus is hard to get in any housing plan, but it reflects the general result of those discussions and surveys among the members of where we think is going to be the most impactful way to make progress on housing in Park County. The plan is supported by the 2021 Housing Needs Assessment, which provides a little bit more detail to the specifics of the housing challenges in the community. Everybody, I think, knows that this is a topic that a lot of people are aware there are challenges, but it's helpful to look at that needs assessment to see what the opportunities are for, say, somebody trying to use a housing choice voucher, which would be the opportunities available to kind of the lowest end of the housing continuum of something with a subsidy like that. So that's the kind of information that you'd find in the needs assessment. We encourage you to look at that online as well. Let's see. So the goals of the housing action plan, let's too many things in the way, are to define clear goals, objectives, strategies, and policies, financing mechanisms, and a timeline for achievement and recommendations for the county issues. When I say county, you'll notice in the plan there's a geographic recommendation for each area. One of the reasons why this is a county plan with specific tools and strategies targeted to some of the communities is that partner organizations such as PCEC, in addition to any other organization interested and able to participate in talking about the plan and the implementation, really broad open table. But we don't want to limit those organizations from taking leadership in housing, and their jurisdiction doesn't end with the city. It's not defined in those other areas. So there are recommendations specifically for the county. There are also recommendations specifically for the city of Livingston. When we look at this as a community plan, we recognize that the city and the county are the only governing bodies able to implement some of the strategies, but they're not solely responsible for everything in the plan, and that we would really love the participation of kind of every possible partner so that we can look at this issue from all sides. So I don't have too much more, trying to get through. Let's see, I think this is Tracy sharing my link, trying to be in the, hopefully I don't lose me here. Okay, so this is a beautiful graphic created by the Park County Community Foundation that summarizes some of those key points of the needs assessment. I won't dive into too much of that background today, but again, I encourage you to look through that when we're thinking about how to target these specific strategies. One of the final pieces before we can hear from some of the housing working group of what we came up with is that, as I mentioned, 13 people are never going to really agree on exactly how to do anything or which priorities. So we spent a fair amount of time with this group talking about how, what are the values that really drive this action plan, and what is the vision for the future of housing opportunity in Park County so that residents can really thrive in having opportunities to access housing for all income levels, ages, household sizes. These are the first 2 guiding principles of 5, if you just want to read those yourselves. And then they're also available in the plan. So again, just some more guiding principles that we set to drive that vision of what it is that we're all here to do. I think Tracy was going to join. I don't know if she wants to speak to some of the framework of how HRDC approaches the entire housing continuum. But if I don't hear her,
I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
I'm somehow listed as you, which is
Here, I'll change that while you're
strange.
speaking.
I think you were
Okay.
trying to fix it while I was in my car. Thank you. I apologize. I was a little triple booked today. So yeah, do you want to go back to that slide really quick? Is that okay?
Yes, I'm not going to bother to change your name right now.
Yeah,
that's too many
great.
screen shares for me.
No worries. Thank you for trying to take care of that for me while I was en route. Parking in downtown Bozeman is always a fun adventure. So yeah, I'm going to talk just a little bit about, the work that we do. Of course, we always talk about housing being on a continuum, or we talk about a housing ladder. And mostly what we try to talk about is that like anything that happens along this housing continuum impacts other components of it. So, we know that right now our market is doing a great job of serving, that high end upper income market. Where we know that we need to have more interventions, is for low and moderate and middle income folks. And so what we try to do when we're looking at strategies and policies is, how can we expand housing access along this continuum in those areas that haven't been well served by our current market. So at the very bottom of that continuum, we're looking at things like emergency shelter, just that basic, let's keep people warm, safe, and dry, and make sure that they don't die outside. But while we're working through that, we also want to make sure that we are providing access to what we consider to be much better options, because shelter is not a great way to serve people in the long term. So, we are also then looking at how can we serve people through subsidized rentals and all the way through lower end market types of rentals. I usually take this opportunity just to talk very quickly about the difference between subsidized and rent restricted, because I think a lot of times people say, yes, we need more subsidized rentals. And subsidized rentals mean that people pay 30% of their income toward their rent. And from a building standpoint, we stopped doing most of that in the 80s. So both rural development and HUD have developed properties that have subsidies attached to them. And good examples in Park County are things like the Sherwood and the Miles building. The other type of subsidized rental that's available are things like housing choice vouchers. And that means that I get a voucher and I pay 30% of my income and I can find a home in the community. We are having increasing difficulties utilizing those because of the market rents in the communities where we work. The primary way that housing is delivered today in the rental market is through the low-income housing tax credit. And a lot of times people talk about workforce housing. And I think that the low-income housing tax credit program truly is a workforce program, because it is developing units that serve those households that are around 50 to 60% of area median income. And those are truly your working households in a community. So those units will be delivered without subsidy, but will be delivered with restrictions that will govern how high those rents can go. And then, of course, we're working in programming, and part of our strategy that we want to work to develop throughout Park County is how can we not only preserve and create more affordable homes for those folks with very low incomes, but how can we expand access for those folks who are just priced out of the market, period, whether it be rental or ownership. So I always talk about it living on a ladder. And right now, all of those rungs on the ladder have been moved kind of further apart from each other. So our goal when we're talking about housing strategy is adding rungs. You know, how can we make this step to this step easier to achieve? That's all for me.
Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah.
And
Within that context,
Lila, I
Oh,
can switch
Michelle.
this. I can.
oh,
switch
that'd
this-
be great.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I'll just talk while you do that. So within that, there's, as you can see, there's a wide variety of needs to achieve. One of the other kind of frameworks that we looked at when developing this plan is not just where is the need not going to have the opportunity to be met by the market, where are those gaps? It's also how can we create a plan that has a balance of policies that have different key implementers, that have different strategies. So is it something that's going to increase the number of homes available for residents in Park County? Is it something that would help bring that cost down so that more people could afford the homes? Just looking at developing a plan that approaches the problem from all sides. And one of the best resources that we had in that was relying on some of the frameworks developed that are available on localhousingsolutions.org. I would definitely recommend anybody interested in learning more about any specific tools that they have a great library of resources as well as examples from peer communities. One of the other important pieces to keep in mind about the priority tools, so these are listed in a ranked order based on the Housing Working Group, but they are also reflective of a long discussion about kind of what opportunities are actually on the table in Montana. And there are a lot of examples that have been implemented successfully in other communities that are not legal within our state. So there's been a couple of different sort of filtering down to get to this list. And we, as a group, have worked to create something that we think is going to give us something that we can start with some short-term goals and some long-term goals and providing additional opportunity. We are joined by a few different members of the Housing Working Group. So I don't know what order anyone wants to go in, but I think that this would be a perfect time to hear from some of the people that participated in that process. And if I'll just wait for a volunteer and see.
I'm happy to go.
Great, thanks, Jen.
Yeah. So thanks, Lila, and thanks, Tracy, for kicking us off here. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. I participated in the Housing Working Group, so it's been a couple of years worth of learning, essentially about the things that are on this list here. And I have a planning background. I was working planner for the city of Helena and Gallatin County for some time. So I thought I'd take on number 11 on this list. It talks about general zoning reform and flexible development standards. And Matthew, I know you're on this call too. And feel free, I'm gonna be really kind of generic about how this kind of reform potentially could help housing. And Matthew, if you have anything to add, please do. So zoning, for better or for worse, can contribute to housing affordability. Zoning, as we know, sets up standards. And sometimes those standards can lead to situations that are potentially overly restrictive. And perhaps the best example is looking at our preference in this country for single family residences. And for one reason or another, that's been seen as the American dream. And we have a set of zoning regulations throughout the country that prefers or has preferred, I'm going to say past tense because I think we're starting to morph away from that. But a process and a zoning code that prefers single family residence. And if you look at a single family residence, particularly in kind of from a regional context, city of Bozeman right now, single family homes are the average home price is close to $800,000. So getting back to my original point, you can look at a code and zoning and start to make changes to it that might help advance housing affordability. In the case of homes, perhaps you make changes that allow smaller homes. Perhaps you make changes to a zoning regulation that allows different housing types like duplexes, triplexes, smaller apartment buildings, smaller lots. So there are all sorts of tweaks that can happen to a regulation that can potentially help overall affordability. One general category, and I think the city of Livingston has done some work on this, as has the city of Bozeman, are accessory development units. So the idea that, you can have a second home on your property that you can either rent or use for family members and help the overall rental market or whatever it happens to be. And there can be barriers to putting in ADUs, barriers aside from the fact they tend to be pretty expensive to begin in the first place. In Bozeman, one of those barriers is, and that Bozeman has this regulation that if you have a detached accessory development unit, it has to be connected to an alley. You've got to have an alley to accommodate a ground floor accessory development unit. And there are many lots and subdivisions throughout Bozeman that don't have alleys. So you're excluding the ability of some people to put in an ADU within the city limits of Bozeman. So that would be one example of a tweak that you can make to a zoning regulation. Take out the alley requirement. So I think we could probably spend an entire session going through different types of zoning reform that could help promote housing affordability. And perhaps at some time we can do just that. One last thing I'm going to mention before passing it off to Matthew, if you want to say anything, is the planning process itself can also add cost to a process, to an overall package. And if you have a process that's overly time consuming, that is hard to interpret, a process that you have to hire an attorney or a professional to walk you through the system, you can imagine that can add costs as well. So jurisdiction could make changes to simplify processes, to shore up the time that it takes to get through the review process and so forth. So that's kind of just my things that I was going to throw out there today. Matthew, do you have anything to add?
Just a couple of things. I think that was a good overview of zoning flexibility. The city has been working pretty hard over the last couple of years now to make the zoning more flexible for housing. So I think that's something I just want to make clear. And we talk about permitting times and costs making housing more expensive. That's not really an issue with the city of Livingston, and certainly not really an issue with Park County, as they don't particularly have too much zoning or permitting that you have to do. So I just want to make sure we're keeping the local context in mind when we do talk about some of this stuff. Our permitting times are quite short and inexpensive, but it's definitely something the city has been supportive of. It's something the growth policy is supportive of, and it's something that we will continue to work on as we move forward as well.
Thank you to both Jen and Matthew. One of the, I don't know if I mentioned this, the framing of the plan earlier, but the level of detail on all of these priorities doesn't stipulate exactly what that zoning reform is. So as Jen was talking about, there's still a lot of opportunity when we move to implementation of the strategies to comb into what that would look like in Livingston and how specifically to target those solutions to get the outcomes that we're looking for. So I think that we have a couple other housing working group members, at least one more. If anybody else that participated in the process would like to come off mute and just take a moment to talk about what you learned and what you hope one of these tools could achieve for the community.
Hi, it's Leslie Feigl with the Chamber of Commerce. You know, I was very happy to be on the committee and to work with all these lovely people and to be able to come together with a kind of a guideline moving forward. And I'm really happy to see so many people on this call today. We have still a long way to go and trying to reach the community around not only the city and the county and to be able to get more input, but I think this is a great framework to start off with. And we're pretty proud of what we accomplished after all those hours. So personally, maybe folks, I just would like to say that don't know, I came from from a company that was large manufactured housing communities, and I am still currently an owner of, and I held a license for 6 years. So I have a large background in manufactured housing communities, as well as you know, renters law, owners law, which under HUD and the US HUD's rights and regulations. And now as the Chamber CEO and of the Visitor Center as well, I started in 2015 the Convention and Visitors Bureau to create a more incredible market here for our business community through tourism marketing, and then 2 years later, the TBID. So in 2016, we saw an increase of not only jobs, business development, and an increase in housing needs because of that. And we still have that today. We do realize that we started seeing an increase a couple of years ago due to COVID. And this is definitely has to do with, you know, this is a national crisis. Every city, not just in the state of Montana, but across the United States, is having these different types of individual crises in their communities. And I like to use the word crisis because we have, like Lila says and mentioned too, we have so many folks here that are, you know, on the level of, or on the verge of losing their home. Say they're a renter and the owner wants to sell the home because the market is perfect. We have seen a decrease in vacation homes, and the vacation homes due to the fact that those owners of those second and 3 and 4 homes are seeing such an increase of value of their home that they're willing to sell them. So we are seeing a decrease in vacation homes, but we're also seeing, because of that, an increase of what rental market is looking like, which is causing a crisis. So I'm really glad to be a part of the conversation today. We believe that the tools that we have laid forward are a great starting point. And again, I'm so happy to see so many people on the call today. So thank you for my time.
Thanks so much, Leslie. I think that might be everybody. Jonathan, did you plan on speaking?
Yeah, I was just, my name's Jonathan Hedinger. I'm the communications director for PCEC, and I'm also was on the housing working group. And I was just kind of excited about two different tools that we're going to host conversations about on December 1st and December 8th. The Community Land Trust. I just thought that seems like a really good tool to kind of help create a community of people that are having a hard time entering into the home buying market, and kind of just having an area where people that kind of are in Livingston and kind of wanting to be someone to be able to kind of get into that area and get into the market. And so I think that's something I'm really excited about. And then I was also excited about exploring the idea of short-term rental regulation. I just think there's a lot of Airbnbs in our community. We've seen Gardner especially have significant issues with vacation rentals taking up large swaths of the housing market. And so I just think I'm excited about kind of looking and seeing what is the impact that short-term rentals are having in our community, and what could we possibly do about it. And so we'll both of those tools we'll be exploring more on December 1st and 8th in community conversations. So I'm excited about that.
Thanks. Okay, I now think that might be everybody that wanted to speak about the tools, but I'm actually doing a good job saving time for questions. So if there's anybody else in the working group that has joined maybe since the call started that would like to speak about their experience, I think that we could still fit that in. This next slide, Michelle, covers.
Lila,
see
can I
Barb
just say
raising her
something
hand.
real quick? Yeah.
Go ahead, Barb.
While you're on this slide, Barb Oldershaw with the Park County Community Foundation, I just wanted to give another shout out to the volunteers who devoted their time to the housing working group. As you can see from the resulting slide, these are some pretty complex strategies that they were looking at, and a whole new vocabulary of acronyms to keep up with the conversation. So we just really appreciate the members of the housing working group who were willing to dive in there for 4 meetings and help us craft a plan that is hopefully going to be reflective of the community's interests and values. So thank you to the Housing Working Group. Thank you to HRD for doing the heavy lifting on this. And thank you to PCEC for helping launch this conversation. It's grateful for community
Thanks.
partners.
Michelle, if you just hit enter, I think, or like, yeah, I think that will get us to the next. Click on it. Yes, perfect. So many different ways to do virtual presentations and slides these days. So again, thank you to all of the Housing Working Group members. It would be impossible to create a community plan without the diversity of perspectives that we had in that. And I would like to echo those words of appreciation. You will find all of the people that participated in that process listed in the action plan. So if you, another reason to dive into that and look at some of those strategies. As we've been mentioning, this is a draft. So what the plan covers about each tool is really the intent of this first phase of the process. And that this is one of the places where there's room for input, there's room for additional partners at the table, there's room for changing those recommendations slightly. And then again, implementation of the plan is going to be a much heavier lift per tool. As you could hear, each of those tools could be days of conversation to get them dialed into what they would ultimately look like. So when you look at the plan, you'll see what it is, why it was prioritized, what that recommendation, again, the geographic areas, a couple examples, the expected impact and impacted players. I think that the impacted players for almost all of them could be everyone, because this is a community issue impacting all of us, but it does look at, just highlights some of those ones that you might traditionally think of per tool. And then I think it's just questions after this one. Yes, a really compelling slide that I made. So there's a lot of people that joined. I don't know if you want to put them in the chat or come off of mute, or if we've received any questions already.
I'm looking in the chat, Lila. And Sabina, I see you have a question. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I can unmute. Thanks. Well, I guess I'm just looking at this from a different perspective. And yes, I understand that our vacation units are increasing and our long-term rentals are decreasing. I obviously see that in Gardner, but I'm curious, has there been a study done that shows how much the increase of the vacation rentals is bringing to each individual community?
Are you saying the decrease of vacation rentals? Because I don't know that we have data to support that there's a decrease. Is that?
No, I'm sorry. No,
Oh.
There's an increase of vacation rentals, which is causing the decrease of long-term rentals. And I'm curious if we know how much the increase in vacation rentals is bringing to each individual community. Because I think that perspective would be really helpful for the big picture of what is happening.
Definitely. And as we were mentioning, I think there's a lot of different perspectives on that part of the conversation, and how to effectively manage the balance is one of the, having that conversation is a primary recommendation. One of the deep dives that we have scheduled, we'll talk about short-term rentals, and we'll highlight some of the data in the needs assessment, as well as anything new that we could find. I know that a lot of communities have had some pretty rich discussions about, what is the balance of, yes, the short-term visitors to short-term rentals are contributing a lot of tourism-related industries. There's also a balance of things like, being a patron of the hardware store, or the kinds of businesses that are the everyday businesses as well. So I think that's one of the pieces that's important to keep in mind about, like, yes, people are spending money, but residents are also spending money. So we'll dive into that topic a little bit more, and I encourage you to join. It looks like somebody added some additional data. The source that the needs assessment mostly cites is data from a company called Granicus that aggregates all of the different possible platforms for short-term rentals, just to give us a better idea of how many are out there and what that growth and spread is. So that gives us a good basis for that conversation. And again, we're not trying to, remove them or make it so that people can't operate their business. It's a discussion that we're recommending about how to best manage.
Okay, I was just going to also throw in that I'm wondering if there might be a little bit of a trend reversal, not much, but a little bit, because I have a friend who bought a house in Gardner. This is her second home. She occupied it for a short time, and then she actually added a unit, and then her second home now has 2 rental units. So she actually added rental units to the Gardner inventory. And I only because one of her reasons is, yes, I'm making less money, but it's also less work for me. And I am wondering, with staff shortages, is there any sort of a indication of a possible trend change that my friend did? Because I expected her to make it a vacation rental, because that's what she's doing with her other house. But in this house, she turned it into long-term rental. So are we seeing any changes like that? Possible indication of any changes like that?
I would say, everybody's making these personal choices. When you look at what the purchase price of new homes, just to make that monthly payment, there's a lot of motivation for people to do nightly rentals. But as you're saying, there's other reasons. There's the value of having a long-term resident that somebody might be working for a business that they're affiliated with, or it's just easier to not have to do the flip. There's a lot of complexity to that one, and we will be diving into that one on the 8th. We also intend to do some conversations in person, specifically in Gardner, and tie this conversation to some of the work being done in Gardner with the Gardner neighborhood plan. Jen, am I getting this right? And that would look at how something like short-term rental regulation would fit underneath the county growth policy and the neighborhood plan, and proposing strategies that align with the values laid out in that neighborhood plan and trying to achieve those goals.
Yeah, and I think I would just add back to some of your original questions, Sabina. I think there is a lack of data. There is a lack of an ability to capture exactly what's going on with some of these housing types and short-term rentals. And it would be helpful to know. I agree with you to exactly, try to get our finger on the pulse of some of these changes in a rapidly changing region. So maybe we can talk about that in future meetings.
Yeah, and something I would add is that, we are obviously not the first community to have to deal with the with how to address short-term rentals, and it looks a little bit different in every community, right? Like what works in Gardner will be different than what works in Livingston. I think, yep, and I just saw in the chat here, so Big Sky has spent a lot of time building a rent local campaign and assessing the costs of that campaign, and what does it take to convert a unit that maybe has been used exclusively for short-term rentals to a long-term rental for the community. I think is something that's worth doing, and it will look different everywhere that we work. But I think that, there is a demonstration that there's a point in each community where it makes sense. So Sabina, to your point about you had a friend that, you thought they would have made it a vacation rental, but there was a point where they said, oh, it makes more sense that we should do this other thing. So I think that there's a lot of discussion behind it, and the deep dive will certainly help with that. Another resource we use is AirDNA, and that helps kind of compile all of the information, what's available, what kind of revenues are coming in. And I think working with our Bureau of Tourism, we might be able to figure out how do folks renting vacation rentals, are they spending on par the same amount as folks that are utilizing a hotel room, or how does that spending align? Because I think that, again, as Lila pointed out, there are a lot of competing priorities, right? The person using a vacation rental may not go utilize the hardware store, but they might go out and eat at a restaurant. So trying to balance all of those pieces. I was trying to look on Big Skies to see what they were paying. I also know that they are spending a lot more than they originally had. And I was trying to figure out what they were paying for some of these rentals. They have it on their Instagram, but at one point, initially what Big Sky had offered was, we will do property management for you, just to convert it over. And they are at the point now, so for a 24-month lease, they are offering $14,500, including tenant screening. 12-month lease is $6,750, and a 6-month lease is $1,500 as a cash incentive.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm trying to keep up with all the questions in the chat. And it seems like this is great that we're going to do a deep dive on this topic. Lila, do you know if that's December 1st or 8th, that the deep dive on short-term rentals? Or Jonathan, if somebody knows.
8th.
The 8th. Thanks, Jen. And then there's a bunch of questions. So Lila, maybe you and Tracy can look at those. I didn't want to miss, I'm sorry, Bob, I saw you put something, got buried a bit here about tax credits, Bob Ebinger. And I didn't know if you had a question related to tax credits, and I wanted to invite you to.
Well, Park County has an awful lot of historic areas. And if you have historic preservation tax credits, you can merge those also with the low income tax credits to help rehabilitate buildings for low income people. So I just wanted to make sure that we didn't overlook the fact that there are advantages to doing historic structures and making them available for low income.
Great. Thank you, Bob. And then Elaine, I think you were up next, and then I'll just keep going through these chats and try to, did you have a question, Elaine? All right, maybe not. Then we'll go to Julie Williams, and you're welcome to join us, Elaine, but we can read your comments, so that's great. You want to unmute and ask your question, Julie?
So I was just curious, I had asked in the chat and I just saw that got responded to, that there was representation from people that were on the lower rungs of the ladder, because I'm not really hearing much of it in this conversation. So I'm glad to hear that that was a part of the working group. And I think the short-term rental issue, I'm a renter. I've been searching for something affordable in Livingston that's not over 50% of my income for over a year now. So I'm glad to hear that the short-term rentals will be getting a deeper dive, but a lot of this conversation, honestly, as someone on the lower rungs of the ladder, feels like it's been focused on tax credits and things that are addressing some of the things that are on the upper rungs of the ladder that, I don't know, like that, that feels a little frustrating to me. I mean, I'm happy this conversation is going on, but I just hope that there is like equal input from people on the lower ends of the ladder, because I continually see their voices getting left out. So that's all I have to say.
I mean, I think the only thing I would point out in just reference to that question is, you know, tax credits are geared to folks at 50% of area median income, and they really are about the only tool we have in the box for both acquisition and rehabilitation, and for the development of new units. When I was talking about subsidized units, we don't make more of those anymore. The subsidy we have is what we have, and consistent with national statistics, we have one subsidized unit or voucher for every 4 to 5 households who qualify. So that is the real, and that is why we also talk a lot about how we want to make sure that our public investments are geared to those folks who, you know, because I think a lot of times people will say, gosh, you know what, like there's money for that. There is not enough money for anything along this ladder. So we want to make sure that we are gearing investments to the folks who maybe are going to be most at risk of losing their housing. But with the low income housing tax credit, it is probably our best hope of producing those units that are between 40 and 60% of area median income. I did also want to just bring up one thing. You know, we do utilize historic tax credits when we can. Unfortunately, a real kind of irritating blip with the historic tax credits is that they have a different term than low-income housing tax credits, and getting investors is difficult for tax credit programming. And every little bit of degree of difficulty that you add to a tax credit deal makes it more difficult to secure the investments that you need. So when we talk about, you know, when we talk about policy, we are talking about, you know, local policy all the way up through federal policy. And oftentimes federal policy has bigger impacts on the work that we do than local policy. And sometimes we feel like we don't have as much voice there. So I just want to point out that, you know, there are things at the federal level that we can also be talking about and moving. One of them is that alignment between historic and low income housing tax credits. But there are many things that happen on the federal level that make a big difference here on the ground locally.
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks, Julie, for your great question. So I see there's a lot of chatter, and I thought that maybe the next question that hasn't been answered is from Sean Hill. If you want to unmute and ask your question, Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I guess I'm trying to get a quantitative sense of the housing need, and housing needs assessments that I'm familiar with identify a specific number of units that are needed per income category, and whether they're ownership or rental. And I see that this housing needs assessment does have trends on projected demographic trends, but it's not clear to me how many housing units are actually needed per income category. And so I was wondering if the team could provide any insight there.
Great, thanks, John. I have been trying to follow all the questions in different places, and I think I'm just going to start answering the ones when somebody comes off mute. There is a chart that looks specifically at how many people fall into specific categories and how many units are existing. I don't think that, we didn't identify specifically how many are needed different than that, but you can see, for instance, there are 221 subsidized units and I believe 991 households in that income range. We did not have the resources to survey everyone in Park County to sort out, do they want to own, do they want to rent? Also, is it, as much as we would love to be able to say like, yes, you could do either, you could rent or own, but if your income is $20,000 a year, it's going to be really challenging for us to build ownership opportunities. So we focused the needs assessment based on who is living in Park County, what can they afford, what is currently available, and then those future projections point to that there are gaps along that, but we did not connect, this is the number that will solve it, because it's really hard to define what those personal circumstances are. One of the questions earlier, and that maybe some of the strategies that we talked about and highlighted weren't geared towards the lowest end of the housing continuum. I think that many of them are looking at coordinated entry. That's a system to manage allocating resources for people experiencing homelessness. There's a variety of other tools in there that look at where those pieces fall together, such as home rehab, where it would be somebody that is in a unit or is in a home that they own and does not have the income needed to support life safety renovations. So the complexity of what is the housing need and how many units, I think that those numbers are really valuable, but I was not able to kind of point them in a direction where there's a box that we can check. Does that answer your question, Sean, or is there something that I missed?
It does. I guess I have a follow-up question then. I guess what's your metric for success? So when we're sitting here in 2026, what figures can we point to measure the outcome?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And if you looked at the draft, and I put the link that's at the end of the slides, that includes the draft action plan and our survey, which is very brief. I encourage everyone to fill that out. That you can see that there's some X units, right, where we don't know what that's going to look like. And part of this phase of the process is that we have this draft plan where we have outlined, these are the needs, this is some of the strategies. And over the next few months, prior to finalizing that draft, we hope that more partners are able to say we need housing solutions and have some level of ownership over the issue in that direction, to where we can start assigning what is success. How many units in a community land trust is going to depend on how many partners we're able to engage in viewing themselves as part of the solution for that. And we do want to fill out that section, and there's a proposed dashboard, which we've had great feedback of where is that going to be hosted. Not entirely sure at this point, because we want to make sure that it is maintained and not redundant to existing work. But we do value tracking, defining what success looks like and tracking those outcomes. I think the need is obviously very large, and progress is progress, but we do need some assistance in setting those targets. So Tracy, do you have anything
Yeah, I think that that's just, really the point in time where we are in this process, right? We are in the draft component. So the housing work group has had the opportunity to talk about the tools that they think will be most helpful to helping us achieve more, preserving more housing and creating more housing. But where we are now in the process is in who's responsible for all of this? What are the metrics that determine success? And that's where we think it makes sense to bring the broader community in to have those discussions. Because I think that, we at HRDC, we can't do all of this ourselves. There is no partner on the phone right now that can do all of this themselves. So having the opportunity to work together as a community and determine how will we be successful and what does success look like is really where we are in this process right now.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm a contract ED for Friends of Park County. So if there are resources or assistance that you think we can bring to the table, please let us know.
Fantastic. We are running low on time, so I put my email in the chat. If anybody has additional questions, feel free to reach out and I can address those or get them to the right person. But I'm going to turn it back to Michelle. I don't think we covered everything, but I really appreciate everybody's time and questions and attention to the process. If you go to our website, there is the supporting evidence and the needs assessment and our draft action plan that this housing working group worked really hard to start that conversation.
Thank you so much, Lila and Tracy, for the excellent presentation. Everybody in the working group. I did see we still have just one more question from Patricia, and maybe we can follow up with you just one-on-one if that's okay. So we can, and the chat was great. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to follow everything. I mean, I think that the takeaway from today is this is a really important issue in our community, and a lot of people that have a lot of thoughts, a lot to bring to the table. And that's exactly, as I understand, the next phase here is how do we encourage that community participation. So thank you for being here. The conversations will continue on December 1st and December 8th. We'll be sure and send a follow-up and links to the December 1st conversation Wednesday at noon on Zoom here will be about community land trusts, and the December 8th conversation will be about short-term rentals. So I hope that you join us back for those and grab the links, fill out the survey, email Lila, and Patricia, I promise we'll follow up with you one-on-one. So thank you all so much for being here, and have a lovely rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.